So welcome to this evening's People, Place and Community Seminar. Our speakers this evening are Olivia Durand and Lucy Haddock-Williams. Olivia is the co-founder and research and development director for the UK-based social enterprise Uncomfortable Oxford, which is now Uncomfortable Cities, an organisation that aims at increasing public awareness and promoting conversations about some uncomfortable aspects, the past and its impact on the present. She is passionate about public engagement and research and is engaged in several other initiatives, such as the Colonial Ports and Global History Interdisciplinary Research Network, and being a senior researcher for the EU-funded Institute of Historical Justice and Reconciliation. She received a DPhil in history from the University of Oxford and is currently a postdoctoral associate of the Global History Department of Freie Universität Berlin. Her academic research is in the field of comparative settler studies and an interest in the Black Sea region. She writes on diaspora, migration and empire, both academically and in a more publicly facing way. And then Lucy Haddock-Williams, who is a very last-minute addition this evening. We are so grateful to Lucy for stepping into the breach. She is one of the wonderful tour guides with Uncomfortable York and is currently doing the MA in Public History at IPUP. So we very much look forward to hearing from you later, Lucy. But for now, over to you, Olivia.
All right. Should I just share the PowerPoint?
Yeah, so we need to share the screen on here. If we get it up, the right one up.
Okay.
This one. Do you want me to do it?
Yeah, please.
And then you can get going.
It's working.
Okay, I need to make you...
Oh, it's not sharing on the other side, I think.
And I need to make you a co-host.
So should I share screen then?
Yeah. Great. Perfect.
Okay, this worked. Oh my God. We were worried, of course, about all the technological difficulties that a history presentation shouldn't have to, contain. But here we are, and it worked very well. I'm also very impressed with the OWL technology that's just filming the room. So thank you all very much for coming this evening. It's wonderful to see so many people here in London, but also to see so many people online. Ruth told me that there is actually quite a substantial number of viewers, so that's very exciting. And thank you as well to Lucy again for stepping in literally maybe 5 hours ago to present the York side of things after the initial presenter unfortunately had some health issues. And so just to reintroduce myself, my name is Olivia Durand. I'm the co-founder and co-director of Uncomfortable Oxford and now Uncomfortable Cities. And as we've mentioned, Uncomfortable Cities is a social enterprise that is dedicated to public engagement with research and specifically to bringing in complex histories, uncomfortable histories from the past into the public space to talk about them in public, on the streets, literally, and to try to maybe democratize the way in which we learn about those stories. So the talk today will be kind of me talking about the organization and the methodology that we have developed through the practice of the walking tours over the last 5, almost 6 years. And then Lucy will present to you in the second half of the talk some specific case studies coming from York, giving some examples of the stories that we talk about in the case of York. We don't have any London stories just yet. I mean, we know many London stories, but we don't have tours in London at this stage. But of course, this is something that is very much on our mind. What is Uncomfortable Cities? Well, it was founded with a specific social mission, which is to raise awareness and to create informed discourse about uncomfortable aspects of our shared history. And though it started in Oxford, it is now present in 3 cities. In Cambridge, since it was founded in Oxford in 2018. And then we started running tours in Cambridge in April 2022. the pandemic in the middle was a little bit of a challenge to kind of seamless growth. And then we started doing tours in New York just last year in 2023 in June. So this is kind of an interesting way of doing history. I didn't necessarily expect doing that when we started with the first tours. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we got started, actually. So the first city, of course, is Oxford. You can see a picture of myself mid-speech with my co-founder, Paula Larsen. And basically, the way we started doing those tours was we were both still doctoral students in history. We felt very interested in initially specifically colonial history, but then our interest grew into a lot of other aspects of uncomfortable histories connected to class, connected to gender, connected to wider discrimination in the past and the present. And when we started the tours, we started doing them after the Rose Must Fall movement had happened in Oxford. The Rose Must Fall movement, the Oxford one, not the Cape Town one, started in 2015, 2016, and then it was rekindled in 2020. And as this movement really brought some attention, some public attention on symbols of oppression in the public space, the main one being Cecil Rhodes on the main street of Oxford. And this was a wonderful moment, and it was a wonderful movement, but it was also very exhausting for the organizers. It was something that needed a very intense work, and they experienced a lot of scrutiny from the media as well. And it was something that kind of at some point when the students who were leading this movement graduated, the movement sort of died off until it was picked up again in 2020 alongside Black Lives Matter movement. And so what we really wanted to do is to try to find a way to use walking tours to have those conversations about monuments, about symbols of oppression, about access to the public space and who has access to it, and what stories are told in the space, but do it in a more systematic way, not do it as a protest, but do it as something that can happen every week and even several times a week. So of course, it wasn't a linear process for us, and we very much started as a project. Maybe for the first 7-8 months, we were graduate student-led project, and we very much did it along those lines. And we eventually decided to move on to a social enterprise model, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that a bit later in this talk. But basically at this stage in Oxford, we have 8 different tours. The reason why we have many tours is not that we just can't stop growing. It's just, so many stories that are being suggested to us at so many new spaces. And the logistics of a walking tour mean that you can only really walk for so long while paying attention. And so if you can only, we find an hour and a half is kind of the kind of perfect number, perfect length. But this means that there are so many spaces that we cannot explore. And for this reason, we did more tours. We also have 2, amongst the 8, 2 of the tours are within museums, in the one in the Ashmolean Museum of Art and Archaeology, and the other one in the kind of a joint tour of the Natural History Museum and the Pitt Rivers of Anthropology, because they are connected in an interesting way. And actually, this number is probably, I'll give you the numbers for 2023, but on average, we have about 5,000 tour participants per year. But I think when I was creating this initially, it was before I had the numbers for 2023. But this means that by doing those tours, we can reach an increasing number of people because those tours are available for people to go on them every, not every day, but most days of every week of the year. So moving on to Cambridge. So Cambridge is our, we couldn't do Oxford without doing Cambridge. Everybody was asking us from year 1, when are you doing it in Cambridge? When are you doing it in the other place? Cambridge is very much a place that is different from Oxford, though there are some striking similarities and of course overlaps in their histories. So we started in 2022, mostly because before that, things were a bit too volatile to start anything. We did receive support from the AHRC as we were doing that. So again, we had this kind of transition from in the pre-tour phase, in the kind of research and setting up phase, it was more an academic public engagement research project, and then it became an organization. And at this stage, we have about 1,000 participants per year on average, because it is newer. We need to know who are the people who are interested to going onto the tours, and they need to also find us. So it takes time. Being around for almost 6 years in Oxford is different from a year and a half in Cambridge. And there too, we have 4 different tours, 3 tours that are on the streets of Cambridge and 1 with the Whipple Museum for the History of Science. Finally, York, and you will hear a lot about York today. So York is the most recent iteration of the uncomfortable tours. We started in June, just this year. We have 1 tour. So, sorry. Of course, my voice is... this was very elegant. And imagine that on the street whilst you're giving a tour. Sometimes it happens, sometimes the voice just gives up, and there are so many other noises. And what's very interesting about York is that it is a small town, a very historical town. It's very walkable, just like Oxford and Cambridge. But it's very different in terms of who comes to visit York and what are the sort of stories that they expect. And it's something that's actually quite a bit of a challenge for us, is understanding the city and understanding what are the stories being told about it and what is the heritage landscape that we're facing there. So, in terms of geography, in terms of, urban landscape, a bit similar in size to Oxford and Cambridge, but very different actually. And of course, the very heavy weight of the universities in Oxford and Cambridge is not as, it is not kind of shaping the city in the same way in York. And of course, I needed to mention, so in this case, we did the same as in Oxford and Cambridge. We started as a public engagement research project with the support of IPUP, the Institute for the Public Understanding of the Past. And we worked very closely with them and with their students as we were developing the tours. And then we started giving the tours from June, and actually a lot of students from the masters are also guides with us. So there's definitely a lot of synergies between the two. I'll just drink some water. Had a voice extinction 5 days ago, but it seems to not be fully healed just yet. So some numbers from 2023. So this was our best year. We had almost 1,200 tours given over the year. It is a lot. It is actually a lot of work behind the scenes to organize the tours, to recruit the guides, to train them, to publicize the tours as well, to kind of make sure the machine is going. And we had across all cities, 15,000 attendees on all tours. And this is the number of tours broken down across the cities. So almost 1,000 tours just in Oxford. So it is a lot of work, but it also shows that there is an appetite to have those conversations, that people do not necessarily want to hear about the story of the dreaming spires of Oxford. They don't necessarily want to hear stories just of excellence. They also want to hear stories about who was left aside, who was ignored, who is still struggling to make their space in the cityscape of those 3 cities. So now that I've given you a general introduction, the remainder of my time will be dedicated to telling you a little bit more about our approach and what is it about the tours. Is it just about picking the difficult stories and pointing our fingers to the stories? Are we just going to be shaming? We're not doing that. This is not the goal. We're not putting all this effort to have a sort of a dark tourism experience. And it's really, we've always been really aware that it's what could come as a criticism of what we're doing. And we are explicitly trying to not do that. Basically, what our tours are, first is that they are discussion-based. During the tour, each stop is thought through a conversation that we want people to be having. We are thinking through questions, open-ended questions that we want to ask the group. it's not just about the guide providing information. It's about everybody in the group participating and discussing the story, the legacy that we are presenting. And the rationale for that is that people often remember a conversation much more than they would remember a lecture. And oftentimes, actually, people tell us when we bump into them after a tour, oh, I've kept talking about it for an hour with my friend after we left the tour. And that's, for us, is the best sign. The goal is also to make the tours educational. Of course, it's about learning things. And we are, again, with this discussion approach, trying to replicate a sort of seminar style way of learning, but on the streets. Thirdly, the tours are meant to be barrier breaking. So they are meant, because of the format, the tourism format of the walking tour, they are meant to bring together audiences who wouldn't necessarily speak to each other. And if I take the cases of Oxford and Cambridge specifically, in those cities, that means members of the university, local residents, and tourists. And those three groups never speak to each other. They try to avoid each other. They'd rather never know about each other. But actually, often they meet in the space of the tour and they'll have those discussions and they learn from each other. And also, if people who are not from there, if they're tourists, they'll bring in perspectives from similar debates that are happening in their respective countries. So it's really about creating a sort of space where different groups of people can meet and have those conversations with strangers, which in on itself is a bit uncomfortable, of course, hence the name. And finally, it is, of course, about fostering critical analysis, about trying to read the urban landscape against the grain, about questioning what are the dominant narratives and what are the narratives that we are not hearing about. What are the type of people that are always put forward and the one that we never see in the kind of the public history of the different cities. So I mentioned that I will talk a little bit more about the social enterprise model and why I decided to do that. It's something that, initially when we started as doctoral students and we were like, we're gonna register as a company, we received a bit of criticism from our peers within our own faculty or departments. I was in history, but I have colleagues in different departments. And there's this idea that you should do it all as a free event all the time. The issue is that it often works like that in the academic world, where often young academics are doing a lot of work for free because it will advance your resume. But what we wanted was actually, this is a difficult work. You're also responsible for the group. You're responsible for the way you present those histories, and you should be remunerated for your time learning, preparing, and your time delivering the tour. At the same time, it was only 2 of us at the start, and it was a lot of work. And what we wanted was to be able to have more people give those tours, train them and work with them. And of course, we wanted to compensate them for their work. So in a way, the social enterprise model ensures that people are paid for running the tours. It ensures the sustainability of the project, actually for it not to not be a project, but actually to be an organization. And we would not have survived 5 years if it wasn't for this model. And also it helps us invest in the communities in which we're doing the tours. So in each city, when we develop new tours, new routes, new content, we consult with different community partners, and we also develop different educational resources which are hosted on our website to make sure that we have a range of resources that are actually free, in addition to the paying tours. And the tours themselves, of course, are sometimes also free, because we do work with several festivals and other organizations within each of the cities to ensure that there's always some opportunity for people to access those events and contents free of charge. So, and this all kind of really goes towards our mission. So I mentioned accessibility. Again, the format of a walking tour has its its drawbacks when it comes to accessibility, but at the same time, it is something that doesn't have, most people will easily sign up for a walking tour when it comes to doing an activity. So we are aware of the limits of the walking part of the walking tour. And this is the reason why we have online resources. We had online tours actually during the pandemic, but it seems like no one really wants to go on an online tour anymore. So we did try to continue offering it, but when week after week, no one is signing up, we're just like, this is not possible. We also learn through practice. So a lot of what we are doing now, we learn through many mistakes. We've changed what we're talking about several times, but we also learn from our participants. They're often the ones who are suggesting new topics and avenues of research for our tours. And finally, we always aim to diversify our public. So we are always trying to think about who are the people we're not reaching and how can we reach them and how can we make them interested in those stories. So this is always something that we keep in mind as we continue to grow. So continuing on the approach, one of the biggest problems that we face, of course, when running tours of the sort is that it's often a little bit difficult to have a conversation when people are emotionally attached to the specific issues, right? You can have very strong reactions, and especially if you're the guide, if you're leading a group, you kind of on the spot at the same time as you need to ensure the safety of your group on the street in a public space. And so the goals of the tours are very much to stimulate this kind of productive engagement on uncomfortable subjects. So actually, it is okay for people to have strong reactions. We want people to speak. However, we need to sort of control the ways in which this is happening to ensure that the conversations doesn't become a dialogue between the guide and the one participant who has decided to make a point, but it remains a multi-directional conversation where everybody feels safe to contribute. So what we need to do really is to create spaces for critical discussions that aren't inflammatory and to navigate those emotional responses. So the methodology for it, to make sure that we are pro-dialogue rather, and against division, is really so I don't think I put them in specific order, but to question powerful statements. So if someone comes to us and says, I'll just give a very blunt example, but the British Empire wasn't all bad. It brought a lot of technological changes. So the kind of the approach towards it will be very much to ask the person, why do you think so? Would you mind elaborating? What do you mean by progress? What do you mean by what was the impact? What was the reason for those changes? And then this really helps to make sure that the space remains in a way open for other people to contribute, because it is not just about two people opposing arguments, but it also invites other members of the group to also contribute to the conversation. And this really goes into something that's very important in that regard, is to prepare. And that's why we have developed, and maybe Lucy will be able to talk about it a little bit when she takes over in a couple minutes, but it's very important for us to prepare our guides. So we really put a lot of time and effort trying to train them and how they would be, to train them for the role that they're going to have on the streets and how to be this mediator. So first we provide a lot of, theoretical training on the topics that they'll be presenting, lots of readings and seminar teaching that happens before they're able to go onto the streets and guide a tour. There's also a lot to do about knowing about the location. So what would be some of the challenges of the location where they're going to be speaking? Then they need to anticipate the audience. Are we going to have an open tour where we don't know who is going to go on a tour? Or is it going to be, for instance, a group of students? Or is it going to be a conference? Or is it going to be a company? So trying to think about a little bit what this audience might have in mind coming onto the tour. And then, of course, it is about anticipating some of the criticisms that might come at the guide and at the organization, and also the limits of what we're doing. At the end of the day, we're not necessarily trying to change people's minds. We're trying to make people open to listen to other opinions. And that's really what we're trying to achieve. If we achieve more, it's wonderful. But our goal is really to try to encourage people to listen to multiple perspectives on difficult historical topics. And to wrap up my section, what is really the core of our methodology is we don't have a good name for it, so we call it the question method. If you have a good idea for a name, let me know. We're still looking for a more snazzy type of title, but again, as I mentioned, each stop is framed around an open-ended question. So if it's all about starting with a question to the audience, and this can be, what do you notice? Or it can be, why do you think this is, what is the reason for this? Why do you think was the reason why, I don't know, why people decided to protest this statue, for instance. But we often move from the kind of the descriptive questions to the analytical question, because the descriptive questions often kind of really engage the participants with the site itself. And then as we tell the story and as we provide the context, we can move on to more analytical questions. And as I mentioned earlier, the goal is also to continue questioning inflammatory statements, because again, what we really want to promote is this sort of critical thinking and critical analysis. And this is where, again, the training that we have developed for guides is quite important, because it is not about what I, as the guide, think, though it is always very hard to let go of your own opinions, and they always exist, let's face it. We cannot pretend to be neutral, but it is really not about what I think. It's about what the other person thinks. It's about trying to really actively listen to the people who are participating in the tour. And often what we really want people to come to the conclusion is that questions are more important than answers. The reason why those topics are contested, why those are uncomfortable histories, is that there is not a clear-cut answer, and there will be many, many different opinions and perspectives on a topic, and they come from historical reasons, where an individual sits in history, from class, from gender, from different types of background, and those are the reasons why a lot of those things are not, there's not a definitive conclusion to any of the conversation that we're having in the tours. So this kind of brings me to the end of my section, but what I really wanted to say is that what we're trying to achieve with the tours is really the start. We're not providing an answer to those to all those contested histories, contested past, uncomfortable legacies. We're just creating a base for people to want to ask more questions. We give them questions, we don't give them answers. And then we want them to take those questions with them as they leave the tour and have the same conversations with other people as they continue visiting the same city or in another city, to notice things a little bit differently, but how the past is presented in the present and why this presentation matters. So thank you very much. And yeah, I think that's all.